Hi folks, this is Lou, and I am going to talk at considerable length about 14 milestones in the evolution of games. And the usual caveats, these slides are wordy for the benefit of those who are hearing impaired or who like lots of notes, and for people who, from English as a second language, I expect most people will listen to the screencast rather than watch it. So Google defines milestone as, quote, an action or event marking a significant change or stage in development, unquote. In other words, it's a time when things change in a big way. In gaming, that's usually when a new type of game enters the market. So that's what usually characterizes the milestones I've selected. Now, some people say, oh, history, who cares about history? Designers should be aware of this history because it affects what games are made today and why they're made and how they're made. And here is a list of the 14. I'll talk about each one individually. And these are listed more or less chronologically. So initially we have dice games, and I use quotation marks because, of course, if you go back far enough, people did not have dice. I'm talking about games of chance. Before dice, people threw shells or sticks that had been shaved on one side, so they had combinations of landing upside down or upside up. Generally, this is a form of gambling, but also used in conjunction with board games once board games were developed. And then we have board games. I'm going to say early historic times, but nobody really knows. So the board is used as a means of depicting maneuver and spatial relationships. Now keep in mind, modern board games often use a board to track status of other things and lack maneuver. But all those old games use the board to track maneuver and spatial relationships. We can talk Mancala, where you put holes in the ground and stones. That's still a board. Nefertafel for the Vikings, tic-tac-toe, nine men's Morris, many other games, many other types. If you read David Parlett's Oxford History of Board Games, there are a massive number of board games going back a very long way, and variations thereof. Then we have tile games, and I'm not sure where tile games fit into the chronology. I'll say medieval and early modern times. They derive from dominoes, and mahjong is one of the more recent additions that's very popular. Even Scrabble is not only a word game, but it's also a tile game. Location matters. And quite recently, Carcassonne got tile games into the hobby game market in a big way. Then we come to manufactured card games. Cards and tiles often serve the same purpose, but cards are much less expensive. Paper cards were made in China in what we would call medieval times, but the true milestone is when durable cards could be manufactured in quantity so they could reach people who were not rich. Then we get commercial games, originally in the 19th century and extending, of course, to now. They were simple and easy to play and did not require much thought, as opposed to chess. Some were entirely random, like Chutes and Ladders. Many fit into the family games category before that category existed. Monopoly started as the landlord game decades before Parker Brothers published it in the 30s. Avalon Hill Wargames come next. Wargames in general, but especially Avalon Hill in the 60s. They went against the family game style. They were mental challenges without being puzzles. They weren't perfect information games like chess, checkers, and so forth. Dice were involved, but you could play the odds. A few of them did not use dice, such as Broadsides, which used hidden information, and Diplomacy, which used simultaneous movement and negotiation. Some were dice fests, such as Risk. Some were not. In 1974, we have role-playing games. There was at least one unpublished RPG, a World War II game, preceding Dungeons & Dragons. There were also games where a player had an avatar, but D&D put it all together and popularized it. Many techniques in video games come from D&D, personal characters or avatars, levels, experience, loot hunts, adventuring in dungeons, and so on. D&D and other RPGs are the bridge between tabletop and video games. Then we have computer games in the 1970s and even earlier. Originally these were either arcade games or were run on a mainframe in one place. So I say computer rather than video because the early ones didn't use video. The old mainframe computers used punch cards and printers, not monitors and keyboards. I saw a Star Trek game in the late 60s where the board was printed out each turn on computer paper. Atari Pong was one of the earliest successful arcade games. Arcade games are different from contemporary video games. The designers wanted you to fail, but not too soon, so you'd spend more money in expectation that you would get better. Modern games, on the other hand, go to sometimes great lengths to help you succeed. Quite a big difference. Then we come to console games, where you could play arcade games at home. Roughly the mid-70s, maybe a little later. Slowly, game developers realized they didn't have to beat the players quickly because they had already paid their money. It's quite different from arcade games. So as save games became more common, these pastimes become more like puzzles than games. You could not lose. You just keep trying until you found a way to win. And of course, Microsoft, Sony, and Nintendo dominate this category through the decades. Next came collectible card games, CCGs. Magic the Gathering, 1993. Now this is really a pay-to-win marketing scheme, not a design technique. Though Magic the Gathering has defined an unusual design style. Hundreds of collectible card games followed, but few have succeeded. Yu-Gi-Oh!, Pokemon, a few others. Consumers now have tired of the marketing scheme for any new physical games, but Magic has the momentum to keep growing. Magic is much better than all board games and RPGs put together in terms of money spent. Blizzard's Hearthstone video game has prospered. It seems there's still some room for new video collectible card games. This was followed by handheld video games or mobile games. And again, perhaps before collectible card games. The Game Boy really got this going. And there were lots of purpose-designed handhelds, which Nintendo dominated the market in. But it was smartphones that made video games ubiquitous. That's where we get the term mobile games nowadays. And then free-to-play made them even more ubiquitous because they don't cost anything to try. So free-to-play has displaced pay-to-play. It's free for most players, but not those who purchase items for cosmetic or functional purposes within the game. And that's how the developers make money. And you always have the danger of pay-to-win as pioneered in collectible card games. Massively multiplayer online games come next. They were preceded by MUDs, which means multi-user dungeon, and the first ones were EverQuest and the like, but they're epitomized by World of Warcraft and EVE Online. Thousands play at one time, usually with their own instance of the game, however, so they're not actually affecting others. But sometimes characters can get together and do something collectively. Originally, MMOs followed a monthly subscription model, but now most are free to play because people wouldn't pay the subscriptions anymore. And that's a result of free to play games. Now, what else do we have? We have LARPs, live action role playing. If you see people running around fighting with wooden or foam swords, it's likely a LARP, if it's not the SCA. Story weekends, where people get together and they act out a story, they wear costumes and so on, are an offshoot of LARPs. We have the ARG, or alternate reality game. Pokemon Go is very well known because of its recent success. ARGs combine a game with reality. What you see on your smartphone screen combines with what's actually there. You see what's actually there and you see the Pokemon, for example. Then we have things like The Sims and Second Life, which are simulations of real life. The most striking of these developments is virtual reality, which is likely to be groundbreaking more in non-game areas than in games. There are lots of products available, but they're not even close to dominating the market. And we all ask, will there be a killer app for this kind of game? So far, there has not been. Now, there are differences between computer and tabletop milestones. It's instructive that in tabletop, the defining games were also the first commercial games. In video, usually they are not. This may be because the original expression in the video game is more than the technology of the time can support. When the technology improves sufficiently, then the big game appears. Little Computer People preceded The Sims, Castle Crashers preceded Angry Birds, Dwarf Fortress preceded Minecraft, EverQuest preceded World of Warcraft, and so on. Now, there's lots of ways to look at this. Mine isn't the only valid one, of course, but it gives you an outline to go by. Thanks for listening.